Hi, my name is Becky, and I'm from the National Social Anxiety Center of Chicago, the Depression and Anxiety Specialty Clinic. Today I'm going to talk with you about the CBT model for social anxiety. So we're going to talk about how social anxiety develops and how it gets perpetuated over time. So as we walk through this model, I want to take you through a specific situation that makes a lot of people pretty anxious: a first date. So when we start thinking about social anxiety, we think about a situation. So I'm thinking about the date that I'm going to go on, and we have really high perceived social standards with social anxiety. So what this might look like is that I think that I need to be funny and engaging. I need to have good questions. It needs to go perfectly, essentially. My standard is really high for what I think needs to happen. Paired with this are what we call poorly defined social goals. So what this means is that I kind of have a fuzzy idea of what I want to happen. So I want to be great. I want it to go well. And it's hard to tell with a goal like that if I ever met it, right? And so if I think about what does that mean, I have a perfectionistic standard, and then I have this kind of fuzzy goal about what I want it to look like on this date, I'm going to start to develop some apprehension. I'm going to start to get anxious. And maybe as I'm kind of getting ready for my date, I start to notice my anxiety. And we develop some heightened self-focused attention. What that means is maybe I'm getting ready and I notice, oh my gosh, my heart, it's starting to race and my palms are pretty sweaty. What happens if I shake hands and you notice my hands are sweaty and shaky and oh man, I'm starting to get flushed, right? So I start to get more anxious the more that I notice my anxiety. Part of the reason for this is because people with social anxiety tend to have a negative self-perception. There's not a lot of positive thoughts about who they are. So maybe I think oh, I'm just not one of those people who's good at small talk. I'm not that great, right? So I perceive myself pretty negatively. And similar to that, people with social anxiety tend to have perceived poor social skills. So they think that they just don't have great social skills. So they'll often describe themselves as awkward, or maybe I think that I'm just kind of fumbling over my words a lot. And so, both of those pieces together are one thing, but then we've also got low perceived emotional control, which means that once I start to get anxious, I feel like my anxiety is driving the bus and there's nothing I can do about it. I'm just going to get so much more anxious and it won't stop, right? We've also got high estimated probability and cost. So instead of thinking oh, maybe this date maybe it'll be all right, it's more of a high estimated probability. So it's definitely, in high estimated cost, going to be a catastrophe. So not maybe it'll go all right, it's definitely going to be a catastrophe. So no one's ever going to want to date me after this date goes so poorly. So if we think about all those pieces together, thinking about ourselves in this negative light without very many social skills or control over our anxiety, and then the definitely going to be a catastrophe, this obviously leads to a lot of avoidance and safety behaviors. So avoidance can take a couple of forms. So maybe I avoid the date entirely. Maybe I call and say my cat got sick or a work thing came up and I'm so sorry I can't make it. Or maybe I avoid in a subtle way. So maybe I go and I get a phone call, a crisis from a friend, and I have to leave. And so I might avoid by not staying in the situation. Or I might engage in a safety behavior. So a safety behavior is anything that I'm doing or not doing in order to make myself less anxious. So maybe for my date, I wear all black so no one can see that I'm sweating. Maybe a black turtleneck so no one can see that I'm flushed. I might rehearse what I'm going to say about myself ahead of time. Think of questions that I can ask the other person. Maybe I have some drinks before or during. Maybe I take anxiety medications before I go on the date. Safety behaviors can be lots and lots of things. It might also be things I don't do. So maybe I don't make eye contact. Maybe I don't talk much about myself and just deflect any questions back onto the other person. Whether we go into the social situation, so whether I go on my date or whether I avoid entirely, afterwards with social anxiety, there's a lot of post-event rumination. So what this means is that there's a lot of worrying, a lot of what ifs. How did it go? How was it perceived? Did it go the way I wanted it to? And if I don't go, I think maybe what are they thinking of me? What does this mean about me? I start to think about all the worry thoughts. And so what happens? That leads back into our model because I develop more apprehension, more anxiety as I ruminate, but I also set my standards a little higher for next time. Next time I'm going to be really engaging. I'm going to be, really great, really funny, really warm. And my goal gets a little more poorly defined. So I think like, oh, it's just, I want it to go well without really knowing what that means. So I get stuck back in that same cycle where the anxiety feeds into itself. So as we think about this model, we want to think about where does this show up in your life? And if it does, next time we'll talk about what are we going to do about that?